September on the sidelines of UNGA. They were, of course, joined by US President Donald Trump. That meeting was co-chaired by Donald Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It's important to remember that very meeting with the participation of these countries paved the way for the ceasefire framework and also the Sharm el-Sheikh declaration. It was acknowledged by multiple times by the US side and also the Turkish side. So this is very crucial. Turkey, as one of the guarantors of the current ceasefire framework, hosting this very important ministerial level meeting here in Istanbul to talk about how to prevent Israel from violating the current ceasefire framework, how to improve humanitarian aid situation, and also the next steps to be taken when it comes to rehabilitating and rebuilding the besieged Strip. Of course, Turkey is expected to, Turkish foreign minister is expected to reaffirm Turkey's long-standing position, which is implementing the two-state solution in the long term, and also we are expecting him to emphasize the need of Gaza's governance and security to be assumed by Palestinians and Palestinians only. So we are expecting him to call for certain arrangements on that and call for that to be done very quickly. And also we are expecting certain discussions about the UN level arrangements, what can be done to improve the situation in Gaza right now. Also another hot topic, of course, whether there will be an international task force established in Gaza, whether there will be US boots on the ground or Turkish troops or Pakistani troops on the ground. That will be certainly discussed during this very important meeting. And it's important to remember Turkish foreign minister met Hamas officials here in Istanbul on Saturday. That's an important dialogue channel, Adnan. It was acknowledged by multiple times by US President and also US Ambassador Tom Barak that made Turkey indispensable. That channel of dialogue with Hamas made Turkey indispensable when it comes to this current ceasefire framework and when it comes to this guarantorship in the region. So the thing coming right after that meeting with Hamas is also crucial, and we'll hear more about all that during the presser today here in Istanbul at 13 GMT, and we will bring you the latest from that one too.
Thank you very much indeed, Kubra. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is calling for rapid implementation of the Gaza reconstruction plan.
From the very first day of Israel's attacks, Turkey has been one of the countries that reacted strongest to the genocide in Gaza. With more than 102,000 tons of humanitarian aid, our initiatives on international platforms and the steps we have taken on the basis of international law, we have stood up to the oppressors. We have made great efforts to ensure a lasting ceasefire and to achieve a just peace. I would like to once again express my gratitude to all the countries that have supported the process, especially Qatar and Egypt. I believe we will continue this exemplary solidarity with even greater strength and determination as we advance. I would also like to extend my thanks once again to US President Trump for his determination in establishing the ceasefire. It is clear that Hamas is committed to complying with the agreement. However, we all know that Israel's record on this issue is very poor. At this point, we need to deliver more humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza and then begin reconstruction.
Here in the studio, Sami Al-Arian, Director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Sabahat Inzam University. Always great to see you, Sami. Give us a framework that these foreign ministers here in Istanbul need to consider in terms of the overall state of the ceasefire, because you can't have humanitarian aid while fighting is going on, so they're interconnected.
Well, Israel has been in violation of the ceasefire terms now hundreds of times. They have not really allowed the aid to come in the sufficient numbers that they were supposed to. The Palestinians been promised about 4,200 trucks every week, an average 600 a day. About the average of 90 have been coming in.
Yeah, 24% apparently, they say, the officials in Gaza.
You know, about maybe 18%, 20% or so, which is not sufficient, obviously, to take care of the massive needs of the Gazans. But more importantly also, Israel has not been allowing the excavation equipment that are needed to get all the bodies from underground, including their own captives that have died, and therefore they are using this excuse to continue the war. They've killed over 200 Palestinians so far since the ceasefire was announced 2 weeks ago.
They also want to talk, these ministers, about the stabilization force. But as I think maybe you and I discussed this, King Abdullah of Jordan said, well, if any nation is going to send troops to enforce a peace, that will be almost impossible. We have Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Jordan, Pakistan and Indonesia, foreign ministers of these 8 nations. What can they contribute to that particular issue?
Well, there has been several plans, and these plans call for the participation of about 4 or 5 nations, Muslim nations, including Turkey. Turkey has, as a country, has been vetoed by the Israelis, and the Americans are trying to find a role for Turkey because Turkey is a party that is trusted by the Palestinians, by Hamas in particular, and therefore the Americans think that it could be a stabilization force. The problem also is that the Egyptians do not trust the Israelis. So the Egyptians have been asking for a UN Security Council resolution to give a mandate to this international force, which the Israelis have been against because they want a freedom of hand. They want to do whatever they want, but having a UN Security Council resolution will tie their hands. They don't want to really withdraw, but the whole idea of a ceasefire that eventually they will withdraw from Gaza so that Gaza can start rebuilding.
Is this really about one word, Sami? And that word is trust. Because it's been said that now Donald Trump doesn't necessarily trust Benjamin Netanyahu. Certainly Netanyahu doesn't trust Hamas. Hamas doesn't trust Netanyahu. Hamas doesn't trust Trump. Trump doesn't trust Hamas. So how is trust going to be built? Does it have to come from the outside, from parties who say, you are all too close to this, let us implement your plan?
It's not really much about trust as it's about the balance of power and the real intention of the different parties to actually implement what's been agreed upon. If the Americans pressure Israelis, then things could go smoothly.
Which they have, though, haven't they?
I don't think so. I don't think they have. I mean, every time they find excuses. When the Israelis killed 200 Palestinians, including 100 Palestinians in one day with 56 children, they said they have the right to defend themselves. We're back to the old adage, to the old saying, which doesn't really make any sense. You have announced a ceasefire, and there they kill 100 people, including 56 children, and you find excuses for them? What kind of pressure is that? And then, you know, the Netanyahu government continues giving vibes about they want to continue the job, they want total victory, absolute victory. They start making all these announcements, which is not conducive to any kind of a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire. So it's not clear that the Israelis have that intention. It looks like they have been dragged into this and they're trying to find, you know, one way out of it. And that's why today you have Turkey calling for these 8 countries to come together to speak in one voice, that the Americans have really to apply the pressure that they promised. Trump promised that this will be the end of the war, but it hasn't happened yet. And then he calls for the massive aid to the Palestinians. That hasn't happened yet. And he's still calling for disarming of Hamas, which was not really what Hamas agreed to. Hamas said these kind of day after negotiations, they would have to be agreed on by the Palestinians themselves. It's not a mandate for Hamas to decide what's going to happen the day after. This is for the Palestinians. Then they met in Egypt, and they agreed to form a 15-member technocratic committee to take over of the day after in Hamas. So in terms of what the Palestinian side, the Arab side, they have already delivered on what's going to happen. Israel has not given any green light to any of that.
Yeah, Hamas had even agreed on who would lead that transitional authority, a very well-respected Palestinian. But we see where we go with that. We're just seeing the shot of the venue with the flags of the various participating countries here. We're expecting it shouldn't be too long a meeting because apparently they will hold a news conference at 1300 GMT. Sami, while we wait for the discussions to begin and our understanding of what they may have agreed, what can you tell us about the security situation in Gaza? Because Israel says that it's violating the ceasefire after its troops are being attacked. Hamas always says, no, we weren't involved in that attack. Are there groups that are out of Hamas's control that are intent on destroying the prospect of peace?
Well, the security situation is very tenuous. There are reports that there are groups that Israel has been actually arming, that they want to start some kind of a strife of internal civil war against Hamas. That didn't go very well. Actually, most of these groups were defeated in the first few days of the ceasefire. But also there are other reports in which says in the areas where the Israelis occupy, which is beyond the yellow line, there are tunnels in which Hamas fighters are there, and they may not